Welcome to the Victims Advocate podcast, where we explore current events, crime, security, and insights into advocacy for victims of violent crime. My name is Brandon Stein, and I am the Victims Advocate. Helping victims of violent crime is what I do, and you can find me at www.steinlaw.com or www.victimadvocate.com. Let's hit it. All right, we are here. Rick Silberman is here. Happy to have him. Happy that you took the time, Rick. I appreciate it. Obviously, I've known you for some years, but I do appreciate you stepping on for a few moments to talk about some interesting things, I think. But, so Rick, first, just for those listening, I understand you have you had a past career in enforcement, law enforcement, but ultimately you are now on a second life. So you're currently working private security. Do I have that right?
Yeah. I did almost 30 years in law enforcement and in the private security sector now, mostly executive protection, private security stuff. Yeah.
So when we're talking private security, what I think of is, people protecting the president, Secret Service and black suits, white shirts, black ties. But, obviously you're not protecting the president. When we're talking private security, it can involve just people like you and me who need some sort of either security or some protection, either for an event or in day-to-day life. Do I have that wrong?
No, absolutely correct. It could be anything from providing premise security for a private event. A lot of large corporations have a lot of private events. It also, could be providing executive protection for high net worth clients, executives, corporate executives, etc.
So when we're talking, I want to hit on the last point that you made. So executive protection. When you say executives, is that CEOs, managing partners, bosses of big companies, or even small companies?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes a board of directors may decide that. Just the nature of the CEO's position or the type of company, they may decide because of world events or local events that they want some kind of security for the CEO because, God forbid something happens to the CEO, could send shockwaves reverberating right through the entire company. The stocks, investors, everybody starts having, jitters. And so it could affect the bottom line to a company. So,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So, obviously, certain CEOs who are working in different sectors may have more risk than others. But what I want to understand is, I'm always interested in the process of things. The end goal is what we see, the finished product. But there's a way to get there, and there's certain things that I'm sure have to be done other than just clocking in and showing up for the job. So in the private security realm, when you get a job, whether it's protecting a CEO, whether it's security for a premise, is there a certain process that you have to undertake to prepare yourself to actually clock in and start the job?
It all depends on the client. You got your high net worth clients that may require a team of security specialists. It could be round the clock security around their residence, office locations. Sometimes you have a security driver separate from a executive protection professional that might be either a bodyguard, so to speak. Could just be a security driver where, he functions as both roles, both driving and providing the security for the individual. In the case of teams, depending on the client, they may have several meetings throughout the day, different locations. You may have an advance agent, somebody going ahead, scoping out the area, looking for, entrances and exits, the nearest hospital, weather conditions, traffic conditions, being prepared ahead of time in case there needs to be some type of an emergency evacuation. You got other large-scale operations where you may have an office setting where you have security professionals monitoring events around the world, locally, providing that kind of data. Just, it's all about preparation. It's almost like a Secret Service type situation, even at a smaller scale. But again, it depends on the client. Like I said, high net worth clients, depending on their level of security needs, have different requirements. Smaller scale could just be, showing up in the morning, driving your client, or just providing physical presence security. And again, that professional should be apprised on what the location entails, any threats, any prior incidents, and things like that, things to watch out for.
So let me ask you. So, well, I've heard the saying, and I use the term. I'm a trial lawyer, but I always use the term with my team. If you want peace, prepare for war. So in the security context, if you're handling, let's say, a team job where it's multiple employees or executives with a company, do you have a team that you work with, or is it you that goes and scopes and cases out the area or the situation so that you could have the most effective procedure, to protect whoever you're tasked to protect?
That all depends on the job at hand, whether it's a team job or if it's a solo job. I've worked, both. I've worked for, like I said, a high net worth client with a whole team, and you got a part of managed by a national security firm. But then you have local regional offices and things like that set up all the scheduling, and it's multifaceted. And I've worked the solo jobs, so it all depends on the actual client and what the needs are.
Right. So, a term that I use, and I've heard other security experts use, is threat analysis or vulnerability assessment. Meaning, when you go out to a property, it might be vulnerable to certain risks. Risks of violent crime, risks of an event, a terroristic event. We saw in New Orleans recently. So when you go out and let's say you're assisting a team and you're going and canvassing an area and checking on certain aspects of where the team is going to be located or operating out of. Is there a checklist that you run through where, hey, I got to check the doors, I got to check to make sure that there are no suspicious characters in the area or anything along those lines?
Absolutely. The larger jobs, definitely there's, I can say a preset checklist for the industry. Some are more intensive than others. It all depends on the location. You definitely want to check the area where you're going to be operating at. You want to check, how many entry points, exit points, again, threat assessments. You want to look at recent incidents in the area. You want to check local police logs. That's where you have an intelligence team sometimes, depending on the size of the operation, doing that kind of work. Otherwise, if it's a solo job, then you got to do a lot of the legwork just to be prepared. You can ask the client, hey, have there been any threats lately? Or ask the office manager, the chief operating officers, find out what all the details are. Excuse me. The preparation is key. Sometimes it's a one-day, just, hey, provide a security presence, and then you just have to have your eyes open, but you still want to be aware of what's occurred before and what the potentials for liability are in the area.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all where, depending upon the job that you're retained on, that really drives either your preliminary process to become prepared for the actual job. Where if you have to go to a larger event, I'd imagine the preparation is a lot different than a small house party or something.
Correct, absolutely, and it's if you're working by yourself, then you want that communication with your client or any other management people that are managing the event. And if you're working in a team environment, the key thing is communication. You definitely, excuse me, you want the communication with all parties involved, and then you want a point person to really be in charge and provide that type of leadership and make sure that everything's being covered. And then, as needs arise, you make adjustments as necessary.
So when you go into a job, whether it's a long-term 8-month job or even just a one-day job, you have for lack of better words, you got an action plan, right? So you go in there and you've done all your homework, you know exactly the risks, you know the threats, you've done your vulnerability assessments, you've spoken to your client, possibly even coordinate with police or crime in the area. So when you go, you already have kind of like going into the Super Bowl, the quarterback has a game plan, right? So you go in and you have a game plan and you know exactly how you have to navigate yourself while the job is ongoing. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the last thing you want is something to go wrong. You don't want anything to happen to the client or the guests of an event or anybody else involved. And it's also your reputation at stake, too. I mean, if something goes wrong, they're never going to call you again, and word spreads.
Yeah.
So same thing. Things go right. It looks good. You look good. And, hopefully you get more work out of it. But the bottom line is to protect the client because that's what you're being hired for.
So when we're talking, you mentioned police earlier. So is there a level of communication that you have with local police departments? If it's a larger event and you're tasked to serve private security, do you have open communications with the police? Are the police even open to speaking with you? Because sometimes, they may be a little closed off. So, talk to me a little bit about that level of communication, because I think that would be important in the event a risk or a threat actually comes to fruition.
Sure. Yeah. Historically, law enforcement people look down on private security for the most part. They try not to, get too involved, and they're not going to really dish out any information or confidential information or things like that, unless it's a shared event where there's a point person that you can go to. So I think the key thing for a lot of people in the profession, in the security profession, a lot of them are, former law enforcement, former military people, and it's key to have maintained relationships that you've made throughout your career. I still have a lot of colleagues, ex-colleagues, former colleagues rather, that are still in law enforcement, either at the state, local, or federal level. So when necessary, you make a phone call and you ask for a little bit of assistance, professional courtesies and stuff, and it goes a long way. One hand washes the other. As information flows up and down, I may come across something that I can share with them and vice versa. But you definitely want to have a point of reference for things that may be going on in the area that you're going to be working.
Well, I'd also imagine, I mean, you're based out of Miami, so if you're going to areas, whether it's Liberty City, Opelika, Overtown, West Park, some of the tougher areas in the Miami, locale, I would imagine you at the very least always want to reach out to the police and say, hey, look, I got a big job here, or I'm doing a job here. I'm private security, I get it, but I just want to get an idea of, the crime rate, or if there's a grid, an area where there's more violent crime than others. Are police departments open to at least giving you that information? Because it is public record. Anyone could look up what the crime is in an area, so I can't imagine them being too closed off in that regard.
No, they're pretty cooperative. Because obviously they don't want anything to go wrong in their areas of responsibility as well. And again, going back to having those relationships that I've made, I can pretty much call any agency, whether I know somebody there or not. Just the mere fact of being former law enforcement, that kind of opens up a little bit of the dialogue and the rapport, which always helps. Especially if you go back to, say, somebody in the same field that I was in law enforcement, you kind of develop that relationship. So, and somebody always knows somebody. I may not know somebody in a particular agency, but I know somebody that does, and they can reach out and make that introduction. So relationships are important in the industry.
Yeah, and the collaboration, and obviously, you spent 3 decades in law enforcement. So I would imagine there's a certain respect factor that, at least, even though you say they look down at private security, fine, but you are a retired law enforcement officer who's now in a second life doing private security. I'd imagine doors open maybe a little easier for you than some 20-year-old guy who just graduated college or something and is just starting in private security.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, definitely.
Now, in terms of your law enforcement career, is there anything in particular that just sticks out where, hey, look, going through this experience, going through that, when I dealt with this hardship or that, boy, that really helped me and facilitated my transition into private security. Is there anything that sticks out?
Well, throughout my career, there have been opportunities to work doing dignitary protection details. You'd have, I can tell you, it was former attorney general came down to talk to the FBI. They used our city's amphitheater at one point, where they brought in all the FBI agents from the Miami, regional office, and so we had to become part of that advanced team and security team during his time there. You've had the president of Haiti visiting, other celebrities and dignitaries. So there's always opportunities to provide some kind of security. And then we have all those special events that cities, municipalities, and local jurisdictions usually have. So there's always a security presence, and you learn all the different aspects of it, from coordinating or just manning a post. Even prior to my law enforcement career, I was in the retail industry. So working in some department stores, there was opportunities to provide protection for celebrities and dignitaries that would come in for some kind of special event. So I did have that experience, so that kind of helped in the transition. I always figured, when I did leave law enforcement, that I would probably go into the private security sector, got my private investigator's license like so many do, and either do some work for attorneys or, private companies. Some doors open, through word of mouth. So, yeah, I felt pretty prepared in the transition.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine, you're not working law enforcement Topeka, Kansas. You're working law enforcement in the Miami area, right? So you see a lot more down here, like you say, dignitaries or celebrities or, other politicians come down here and they need the assistance of local law enforcement. So in a sense, you were training for years to do your job now, and what you're doing now, right? Fair to say?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. You say dignitaries or people coming down. What was huge in the news was, the murder that happened of the CEO of United Healthcare, right? And that's out of New York, and that's just wild to me. And, in my line of work and what I do, obviously the first thing I look to is, well, wait a minute, where that happens in that area, how on earth does anyone get that close to him when you're in that position as a CEO of a mega healthcare company? There has to have been a breach or something along those lines. I'm just curious, in your line of work, being that you've done this now 4 decades almost, in some capacity, enforcement, security, what crossed your mind? You saw that happen. It was obviously, holy shoot, that's crazy. But was there anything from a security context that you thought about that, boy, there had to have been a breach here or a break here or a vulnerability that they didn't appreciate there,
Sure. Well, the same questions that everybody had on their mind, when that incident occurred was, why didn't he have a security presence around him? Obviously, he left his hotel early in the morning. He was out on the street walking. So apparently there was no security presence. They probably didn't feel there was some kind of a threat. There are some CEOs that really don't like having a security presence. And again, sometimes it's imposed on them by a board of directors. In this case, the individual that shot him, wasn't even a local. He came in from out of town, so he had to have done, some kind of research to know where the CEO was possibly going to be, how he found out which hotel he was staying at. Who knows? Sometimes, somebody talks too much. When more than, one person knows something, then, there's a risk of that information getting out to others. So, again, the question is, why was there no security for him? He is the CEO of a large corporation. There must have been threats. There must have been some concerns being in that position. So, and everybody had the same questions, and still a lot of it is unanswered. It's just
it's crazy because this guy, I mean, he's a murderer. He murdered someone in cold blood, and I saw some crazy things where, he's a hero or he's helping the little guy. I mean, look, I get it, but when you're, these people are out here, and you make an interesting point, that this guy was from out of town. He wasn't living 2 blocks away and just happened to run into him, bang, bang, and done. This guy cased it out, scoped it out, really put some thought into it, kind of akin to what we were talking about earlier related to a security detail. It's kind of like a game of chess where you're trying to protect someone like the CEO of a healthcare company, knowing that there might be people just as smart out there trying to outsmart you. So it really is not just about looking at the environmental factors, but it's also, the human element and who's going to be approaching and where are the risks present for something like this,
Yeah, exactly. And then, you also had the issue of the murderer, the suspect in this case, printed the gun, I believe, with a 3D printer, which is becoming another, issue around the country from time to time in different incidents. You can get through magnetometers, with a 3D printed gun. You run the risk of the thing exploding in your face, but these guys are going to either test it out or take their chances. But yeah, it's a dangerous world, and again, it's a matter of knowing the threats, doing threat analysis. When a large corporation, they have people that do this. They go through social media. They look to see what's going on, what people are saying, in the different circles. And you have your anarchist crowds. You have your kids that are anti-establishment, anti-government, anti-everything. And it's always going to be that case. So you have to try to stay one step ahead and just be alert. So yeah, for the security professional involved in these types of protection details, you have to have your head on a swivel and eyes behind your head as well. So it's crazy.
No, it's crazy, and you have to, one thing we didn't really, I'd love to have you on again, but we didn't really address technology and how the changes in technology, whether it's social media or, like you say, a 3D printing gun that can get past a magnometer and essentially bypass security measure, how that affects things also, and just the preparation, the detail that you're going to be providing. But look, Rick, I know you're busy. We don't get to talk much, but I do appreciate you jumping on, man. I always appreciate your services. Like I said at the beginning, I've known you for years, so I do appreciate that. You got a good team around you as well. That I know for a fact. But, really, well, let me do this. If people need you, for a job or service, is there an easiest way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I could provide you with an email. I don't know if you want it now. Or,
Yeah, brother. Absolutely. The best way to get in touch with you.
Yeah, so you could do SGTRICK141@gmail.com. So it'd be like Sergeant Rick 141@gmail.com.
Perfect. And what an appropriate email for what you do. That's for sure. Well, Rick, listen, man, thank you so much. I appreciate the time. Interesting discussion. Even current events always comes into this stuff,
All right. Anytime, Brandon. I appreciate the invite. It's fun.
All right, my man. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, great. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brandon Stein, and I am the victim's advocate. Your voice matters, and if you or someone you know needs representation, visit steinlaw.com or victimadvocate.com for more information. See you next time.